The stench of stale coffee and sizzling bacon grease clung to Ilara Vance like a shroud she couldn't shake off. For 2 years, this had been her world, a world of cracked vinyl booths, sticky ketchup bottles, and the relentless hum of the Starlight Diner's neon sign. For the 3 men in the corner booth, dressed in suits that cost more than her annual salary, she was just part of the scenery, a ghost in a faded apron. They laughed, their voices sharp and cruel, mocking the very air she breathed. They had no idea that this ghost, this tired waitress, held the key to a universe they couldn't even comprehend. And they certainly didn't notice the quiet old man in the opposite booth, watching it all about to change everything with a single question. The Starlight Diner was a relic, a capsule of a bygone era, marooned in the gleaming, fast-paced world of downtown Boston. Its chrome had lost its shine, and the red of its vinyl seats was cracked like old lipstick. For Ilara Vance, it was both a sanctuary and a prison. At 26, she moved with an economy of motion that spoke of bone-deep weariness, her shoulders perpetually slumped, under a weight no one could see. Her name tag, pinned crookedly to her pale blue uniform, simply read, Ellie. It felt like a costume, a persona she put on with the apron each morning at 6 a.m. The real Ilara, the one who could fill whiteboards with elegant, sprawling equations describing the birth of stars. The one who once walked the hallowed halls of MIT with a fire in her eyes, was buried so deep she sometimes wondered if she still existed. Ellie Order up table 4 barked Sal, the diner's owner, his voice a gravelly roar over the sizzle of the griddle. Ilara nodded, grabbing the heavy plate of pancakes and bacon. Table 4 was a regular, a kind elderly woman named Mrs. Gable, who always left a $1 tip and a warm smile. It was the small kindnesses that got Ilara through the day, those and the thought of her younger brother Leo. Everything was for Leo. Leo, with his brilliant, mischievous mind, trapped in a body betrayed by a rare genetic disorder, was the reason she was here. The world-class experimental treatment he needed wasn't covered by any insurance. It came with a price tag that looked like a telephone number, a monstrous figure that had forced Ilara to abandon her PhD in theoretical astrophysics, sell her father's beloved telescope, and trade her dreams for the greasy reality of the Starlight Diner. Every dollar she earned, every crumpled bill tucked into her apron pocket, went into a fund mockingly titled the Leo Project. It was growing at a glacial pace. As she cleared a table, her fingers instinctively traced a pattern on the grimy surface, a simplified diagram of a Calabi-Yau manifold. It was a nervous tick, a ghost of her former life. She saw the universe in the swirl of cream in a coffee cup, in the fractal patterns of a spilled salt shaker. Her mind, once a finely tuned instrument, designed to probe the deepest secrets of the cosmos, was now occupied with memorizing who wanted their eggs over easy and who preferred rye toast. The dissonance was a constant, dull ache in her soul. Her shift was nearing its end when the bell above the door chimed, announcing the arrival of what Sal derisively called the suits. 3 men all under 30, exuding the potent, suffocating aroma of expensive cologne and unearned confidence. They slid into the corner booth, the one with the best view of the street, and immediately began speaking in loud, self-congratulatory tones. Ilara grabbed her notepad and a glass of water, her face settling into a mask of polite neutrality. "Evening, gentlemen. What can I get for you?" she asked, her voice flat. The one in the center, with slicked-back blonde hair and a gleaming Audemars Piguet watch on his wrist, didn't even look at her. He was too busy boasting to his friends. And that's when I told them, Viridian Ventures doesn't invest in ideas, we invest in disruptors. And Finch's project, my God, it's not just a disruption, it's an extinction-level event for the old guard. The man to his left, whose tie was aggressively pink, laughed. "Sterling, you're a killer, an absolute shark. The board must be thrilled." Sterling finally deigned to look up at Ilara, his eyes scanning her uniform with a dismissive smirk. "Just coffee for now, sweetheart. Black. And make it quick. We're celebrating a multi-million-dollar seed round, not waiting for the pot to brew." Ilara's jaw tightened. "Sweetheart." The casual condescension stung more than overt rudeness. She nodded curtly and turned away, the names echoing in her mind. Viridian Ventures. Finch. A cold dread, sharp and familiar, pricked at the back of her neck, but she pushed it down. It had to be a coincidence. There were hundreds of researchers named Finch. It couldn't be him. As she poured the coffee, her hands trembled slightly. She took a deep breath, staring at her reflection in the polished chrome of the coffee machine. A tired woman with haunted eyes stared back. She was no one. Just Ellie, the waitress. The life she'd lost felt like a distant star, a beautiful burning light she could see but never ever reach. The coffee was delivered with silent efficiency. Sterling Davenport and his associates, Chad and Bryce, paid it no mind already, deep into their victory lap. Their voices grew louder, their laughter more obnoxious, turning the quiet diner into their private clubhouse. "The projections are insane," Bryce said, scrolling through his phone. "If Finch's quantum computing architecture works, we're not talking about a 10x return. We're talking 1000x. We'll be legends. It's already working," Sterling corrected, puffing out his chest. "The prototype is stable. That's what sealed the deal. Alistair Finch is a genius. A bit of a stodgy academic, but a genius nonetheless. Plucked him right out of MIT. This time, the name hit Ilara like a physical blow. Alistair Finch, MIT. The coffee pot in her hand tilted a splash of hot liquid scalding her wrist. She flinched, biting back a cry of pain as she set the pot down with a clatter. The sound drew their attention. "Whoa, they're careful," Chad snickered. "Don't want to damage the merchandise." He wasn't looking at the coffee pot. Sterling's eyes narrowed on her. "Problem, no." "Sorry," Ilara mumbled, wrapping a napkin around her burned wrist. Her mind was reeling. Dr. Alistair Finch had been her PhD advisor, her mentor, the man whose name was on the research paper that had destroyed her academic career, a paper built entirely on her stolen work. The world tilted on its axis. The project they were funding, the extinction-level event, was her project. Her theory, her life's work. A wave of nausea and white-hot rage washed over her. She felt trapped a fly in amber, forced to serve coffee to the very men who were bankrolling the thief who had ruined her life. Her inner turmoil must have shown on her face, because Sterling's smirk widened. He saw a frazzled waitress, not a woman whose soul was being ripped apart. He saw an easy target. "Tough day at the office?" he asked, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. It must be hard refilling coffees all day. All that complex decision-making. "Regular or decaf, whole milk or skim?" Chad and Bryce howled with laughter. Ilara stood frozen, her blood turning to ice. She wanted to scream, to throw the coffee in his smug, handsome face, to tell him that she had solved differential equations in her sleep that he couldn't comprehend in a lifetime. But what would that accomplish? They'd have her fired, and Leo needed the money. So she swallowed the acid in her throat and said nothing. Her silence only emboldened them. "You know I respect it," Sterling continued, leaning forward conspiratorially. "The simple life. No ambition, no stress. Just trays and tips. What's the biggest problem you've had to solve today, sweetheart? Figuring out who gets the last slice of apple pie." "Leave her alone," Sterling Bryce mumbled, a flicker of discomfort in his eyes. "What, I'm just making conversation." Sterling said, his eyes fixed on Ilara, enjoying her humiliation. "I'm genuinely curious. What does someone like you think about? Like when you're not taking orders. Do you ever dream of doing something more, or is this it? Is this the peak?" Each word was a carefully aimed dart. He wasn't just being rude, he was systematically dismantling her humanity, reducing her to a caricature of a failed life. He was judging her based on her uniform, on her circumstances, without an ounce of curiosity about the person inside it. He was everything she had come to despise about the world, a world that valued polished resumes and inherited wealth over raw, unvarnished intellect. Ilara's gaze drifted past them to the window overlooking the street. Rain had begun to fall, the neon lights of the city blurring into abstract streaks of color on the glass. It looked like a painting of a collapsing galaxy. She felt a profound sense of dislocation, as if she were observing her own life from a vast, cold distance. She had to get away. She turned to leave her shift almost over her spirit, almost broken. "Hey, I'm talking to you," Sterling called after her, his voice sharp with annoyance. "Don't you walk away when a customer is talking to you. It's rude." The sheer hypocrisy of the statement was breathtaking. Ilara stopped, her back still to him, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. She could feel the eyes of the few other patrons in the diner on her. The shame was a physical heat on her skin, and from a booth in the far corner, a quiet observer who had been nursing a cup of tea for the past hour finally looked up from his newspaper, his gaze sharp and discerning. He had seen enough. Julian Croft preferred diners to Michelin-starred restaurants. The coffee was honest, the conversations were real, and you could feel the pulse of a city in a way you never could from the sanitized confines of a boardroom. At 72, he had built a global empire, Ethelred capital, on a simple principle: look for value when no one else is looking. He had made his first billion investing in a software company everyone had dismissed as a garage project, and his latest by backing a biotech firm run by a maverick scientist the establishment had labeled a quack. He looked nothing like a billionaire. Dressed in a worn tweed jacket and simple trousers, he could have been a retired professor or a librarian. He valued anonymity. It allowed him to observe, to listen, to see the world not as it was presented to him, but as it truly was. He had been in the Starlight Diner for an hour, enjoying the simple pleasure of a grilled cheese sandwich and reading a well-worn copy of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. He had noticed the waitress earlier. There was a quiet intensity about her, a precision in her movements that seemed out of place. He saw the flicker of complex thought in her eyes as she stared out the window, a look he had seen before in brilliant but frustrated engineers and sidelined physicists. Then Sterling Davenport and his entourage had arrived. Croft knew of Sterling. The young man was the son of a rival investor, a boy born on third base who thought he'd hit a triple. He represented a new breed of venture capitalist. Croft loathed arrogant superficial, driven by buzzwords and herd mentality, rather than genuine insight. They didn't build things. They just moved money around, skimming cream off the top and leaving a trail of inflated egos in their wake. Croft watched with growing distaste as the trio's celebration devolved into the casual bullying of the waitress. He saw Sterling's predatory glee, the way he savored her discomfort. He saw the waitress Ellie, her name tag said, absorb the insults her face, a stoic mask that barely concealed a universe of pain and anger. He saw her flinch when they mentioned the name Finch, a reaction so sharp and visceral it couldn't be a coincidence. His interest piqued. This was no ordinary scene. This was a story unfolding a drama of hidden depths and cruel ironies. When Sterling called out, "Don't you walk away when a customer is talking to you." Croft carefully folded his newspaper, placed it on the table, and took a slow sip of his now cold tea. The young man's arrogance was a symptom of a deeper ignorance. He believed the world was exactly as it appeared on the surface. He saw a waitress and assumed that was the sum total of her existence. He couldn't imagine the complex, invisible architecture of a life that had led her to this place. Julian Croft, however, had built his fortune on imagining exactly that. He knew that genius was not always found in boardrooms or university labs. Sometimes it was hiding in a plain sight, waiting for someone to ask the right question. He had come to Boston for a specific reason. He was quietly searching for a mind capable of solving a problem that had stumped the greatest thinkers at his own company's advanced research division. The problem was esoteric, a theoretical knot at the intersection of quantum information theory and cosmology. His team of world-class physicists had hit a wall. They were brilliant, but their thinking was constrained by dogma, by the established pathways of academic thought. He needed someone different, someone with nothing to lose and a mind free from the shackles of convention. As he watched Elara stand there, her back rigid, absorbing the final insult, an idea began to form in his mind. It was a long shot, a wild, improbable gamble. But Julian Croft had become a legend by betting on the improbable. He slid out of his booth, his movements deliberate and unhurried. The diner seemed to hold its breath. Sterling, annoyed at the interruption, glanced over at the old man, approaching their table. "Can we help you, Pops?" Sterling asked, dismissively waving a hand. "We're in the middle of something here." Julian Croft ignored him completely. His eyes, a pale, piercing blue, were fixed solely on Elara. He stopped a few feet away, his expression calm, almost gentle. The entire dynamic of the room shifted the power balance, tilting away from the loud men in expensive suits towards the quiet old man in the tweed jacket. The stage was set. The players were in place, and the billionaire was about to ask his question. Julian Croft's voice was not loud, but it cut through the diner's ambient noise with the clarity of a bell. It was a voice accustomed to being heard, a voice that carried the quiet authority of immense power. He still hadn't looked at Sterling. His focus remained entirely on Elara's back. "Pardon the interruption," he began, his tone polite but firm. "I couldn't help but overhear. You gentlemen seem to be experts in identifying high-value opportunities, men of finance, disruptors." Sterling preened, mistaking the interruption for an act of deference from an admiring stranger. "That's right," he said smugly. "Viridian Ventures. We fund the future." "The future," Croft repeated, a thoughtful, almost sad note in his voice. "A noble pursuit." He finally turned his head, slightly, his piercing gaze sweeping over Sterling, Chad, and Bryce. They fidgeted, under the weight of it, a sudden, inexplicable sense of being scrutinized and found wanting. "So," Croft continued, his voice hardening almost imperceptibly, "a mind capable of shaping the future must be able to grapple with complex, abstract problems. Allow me to propose a hypothetical one for you." He paused, letting the silence hang in the air. Elara, hearing this strange turn of events, slowly turned around. Her eyes met Croft's. For a fleeting moment, she saw not pity, but a profound, startling curiosity. Croft addressed the three VCs directly. "Imagine a closed, entangled quantum system. Let's say, for the sake of argument, it's an information paradox modeled after a black hole's event horizon, where Hawking radiation appears to cause a loss of quantum information, violating the principle of unitarity." Sterling's confident smirk faltered. Chad and Bryce exchanged confused glances. The words were English, but they might as well have been an alien language. They were used to terms like synergy, burn rate, and market cap. This was something else entirely. Croft wasn't finished. He pressed on his voice, weaving a tapestry of theoretical physics so dense it was suffocating. Now, according to the no-hiding theorem, information cannot be perfectly hidden within the correlations between a system and its environment. Yet it appears lost. Here is the question for you, the funders of the future. How would you leverage M-theory's proposed 11 dimensions specifically by manipulating the topology of the compactified Calabi-Yau manifolds to devise a practical protocol for extracting the seemingly lost information without violating quantum unitarity? The silence that followed was absolute. It was a heavy, crushing silence, filled with the intellectual death of 3 arrogant men. Sterling's face had gone from smug to confused to pale. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He was a master of bluffing his way through board meetings, of using jargon to intimidate founders. But this was a different league. There was no room for bluffing here. "That's a ridiculous question," Chad stammered, his bravado evaporating. "What does that have to do with venture capital?" "It has everything to do with the future you claim to be funding," Croft replied, coolly, his disappointment palpable. "The very quantum architecture your Dr. Finch is likely building rests on these foundational principles. If you don't understand the bedrock, how can you possibly hope to build a house upon it?" He looked at Sterling, his eyes cold. "So your answer," Sterling swallowed hard. He looked at his friends for help, but found only blank panic. He tried to muster his usual arrogance. "Listen, old man, we're not physicists. We're investors. We hire people to understand this stuff. We see the big picture." "I see," Croft said softly. "The picture is so big, you can't see any of the details. How convenient." He dismissed them then with a simple final turn of his head. It was a gesture more powerful than any insult. It rendered them insignificant, obsolete. Then his gaze, now softened with an almost hopeful intensity, fell upon Ilara. She was staring at him, her eyes wide, her face a mask of disbelief. The question he had posed was not just a random string of academic jargon. It was a variation of the central thesis of her abandoned dissertation. It was the problem that had kept her awake at night for years, the beautiful, intricate puzzle she had been on the verge of solving before her life had imploded. The other patrons watched, mesmerized. Sal stood frozen behind the counter, a spatula in his hand. Mrs. Gable stared over the top of her glasses. Miss Julian Croft said to Ilara, his voice now gentle, "Forgive me, but you have the look of someone who thinks in equations, not in tips. Would you perhaps have an answer?" Sterling let out a short, incredulous bark of laughter. Are you kidding me? She's a waitress. She probably can't even balance her own checkbook." The insult, which would have crushed her moments before, barely registered. Ilara didn't hear him. She was lost in the elegant architecture of the question. Her mind, dormant for so long, roared to life like a dormant star collapsing into a supernova. The dust and grime of the Starlight Diner fell away, replaced by the clean, infinite blackboard of her imagination. The weariness vanished from her eyes, replaced by a brilliant, focused fire. She was no longer Ellie the waitress. She was Ilara Vance, the physicist, and she had the answer. For a long moment, Ilara said nothing. She simply looked at the old man, a silent communication passing between them. It was a look of recognition. He wasn't just asking a question, he was offering a key to a door she thought was locked and sealed forever. She took a shaky breath. Her voice, when it came, was quiet, hesitant at first, rusty from disuse. "You're postulating a variation of the AMPS firewall paradox." She began, her eyes unfocused, looking at a point in space just past the old man's shoulder. "The core issue is the apparent conflict between the equivalence principle of general relativity and quantum unitarity. Sterling scoffed, but Bryce put a hand on his arm, his eyes wide with a dawning sense of shock. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the sudden dramatic shift in her demeanor. The tired, defeated waitress was gone. In her place was someone else, entirely. Someone with an unnerving, palpable authority. Ilara's voice grew stronger, more confident with every word. The diner, the mocking faces, the smell of grease, it all faded into the background. She was back in her element. Leveraging M-theory is the correct approach, but most models make a fundamental error. They treat the extra dimensions as static as a passive backdrop. The key isn't just their existence, but their dynamics. The Calabi-Yau manifolds. They're not just geometric shapes. They can vibrate. They can fluctuate. They possess their own quantum states. She picked up a salt shaker and a pepper shaker, placing them on the table. If the black hole is here, she pointed to the salt, and the emitted Hawking particle is here, she pointed to the pepper. They appear causally disconnected to an outside observer. The information seems lost. Her hands began to move, sketching invisible diagrams in the air. Her speech became a torrent, a cascade of complex ideas delivered with breathtaking clarity. But if you introduce a dynamic brain-world scenario, imagine our four-dimensional space-time is a D-brain embedded within the higher dimensional bulk. The information isn't lost in the Hawking radiation. It's encoded in the subtle gravitational perturbations, the brain ripples, that propagate into the compactified dimensions. It doesn't violate the no-hiding theorem because it's not hidden in the correlations of our observable universe. It's translated into the vibrational modes of the manifold itself. She looked directly at Croft, a passionate fire in her eyes. So your protocol for extracting it wouldn't involve trying to decode the Hawking radiation directly. That's a fool's errand. You'd need to build a detector sensitive to these higher dimensional gravitational echoes. It would require creating a localized, highly unstable Kaluza-Klein graviton field. Essentially, you would have to ping the extra dimensions and analyze the resonance. The returning signal would carry the imprint of the information that fell into the singularity. You're not retrieving the original qubit. You're reconstructing it from its higher dimensional ghost. Unitarity is preserved, but in a way that's invisible to any observer confined to the four-dimensional brain. She finished, her chest heaving slightly, the silence in the diner, now one of complete and utter awe. She had not just answered the question. She had dissected it, improved upon it, and presented a solution of such elegance and originality that it was a work of art. Sterling Davenport's jaw was slack. His face was a mask of utter, world-shattering disbelief. He looked back and forth between the waitress and the old man as if he were witnessing a magic trick he couldn't possibly comprehend. This woman, this sweetheart he had mocked, had just articulated a concept so far beyond his comprehension that it made his multi-million-dollar deal feel like a child's lemonade stand. Ilara, coming back to herself, suddenly felt a flush of embarrassment. She was standing in the middle of a diner having just delivered an impromptu lecture on theoretical physics. She looked down at her stained apron, at her worn-out shoes. But Julian Croft was not looking at her apron. He was looking at her as if he had just discovered a new constellation. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face, lighting up his aged features. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated delight. Incredible, he whispered the word filled with reverence. Absolutely incredible. That's the missing piece. The ghosts in the manifold. My team has been stuck on the static model for a year. He extended a hand, its skin wrinkled, but its grip surprisingly firm. My name is Julian Croft. The name dropped into the silence like a 10-ton weight. Bryce, the one who followed the markets, audibly gasped. Julian Croft, as in Ethelred Capital. Sterling's face went from pale to a ghastly shade of white. Julian Croft was not just an investor, he was the investor. A legend. A kingmaker whose disapproval could blacklist a firm like Viridian Ventures overnight. And he, Sterling Davenport, had just spent the last 20 minutes acting like a preening, cruel jackass in front of him, while mocking a woman who apparently was one of the most brilliant minds on the planet. The full catastrophic weight of his actions crashed down upon him. He had not just made a fool of himself. He had committed professional suicide in the middle of a greasy spoon diner. Elara shook Julian Croft's offered hand, a dazed look in her eyes. The name registered, of course. Anyone who followed science and technology knew of Ethelred Capital and its visionary, almost mythical founder. But the implications were too vast for her tired mind to process. You're, she stammered. I'm someone who has been looking for a mind like yours for a very long time, Croft said, his smile never wavering. He gestured to his own empty booth. Please, Miss Vance, she supplied her voice, barely a whisper. Elara Vance. Miss Vance, please sit with me. I believe we have a great deal to discuss. He guided her to his table, leaving Sterling and his friends frozen in their own private tableau of horror. As Elara sat down on the cracked vinyl, her legs feeling weak, Croft flagged down Sal, who was still gaping from behind the counter. 2 more teas, please, Sal, and put this table's entire bill and a generous tip on my account. Sterling started to sputter, a protest or an apology. It was hard to tell which, but Croft silenced him with a single withering glance. I believe you gentlemen were just leaving. It was not a suggestion. It was a command. Scrambling over each other, the 3 men grabbed their coats and practically fled the diner, disappearing into the rainy Boston night like startled rats. The diner was quiet again, save for the hum of the refrigerator and the gentle patter of rain against the window. Elara stared at her hands, which were resting on the table. They were the hands of a waitress, chapped with a small red burn mark on the wrist. They didn't feel like her own. Miss Vance Croft began, his voice gentle again. An answer like that doesn't come from casual reading. That comes from years of deep, rigorous, passionate work. You are no waitress. Elara looked up, and for the first time in 2 years, she let the mask of Ellie fall away completely. The dam of her composure cracked by the insults and shattered by the question finally broke. The story came pouring out, not as a plea for sympathy, but as a simple statement of fact. She told him about her promising start at MIT, her research, her focus on a unified theory. And then she told him about Dr. Alistair Finch. He was my advisor, she said, her voice laced with the old bitter pain of betrayal. I trusted him. I shared all my work with him, my notebooks, my simulations. My central thesis was the dynamic brain model, the ghosts in the manifold, as you called it. He told me it was promising but flawed, that I was years away from a provable result. He encouraged me to focus on a safer, more conventional topic for my dissertation. She took a shaky sip of the tea Sal had placed before her. Then, my brother got sick. The diagnosis was devastating. I had to drop out. I had no choice. I took a leave of absence, promising myself I'd come back. 2 months later, I saw it. Finch published a paper in Physical Review Letters. It was my work, my theory. He had taken my raw concepts, polished them, and passed them off as his own. He called it the Finch postulate. She laughed, a short, humorless sound. I tried to fight it. I contacted the university, but I was a dropout with notebooks full of what they called incoherent scribbles. He was a tenured professor with a sterling reputation. My name was on none of the preliminary filings. It was my word against his. They buried my complaint. I was ruined. No other university would touch me. No lab would hire me. So I came here, to pour coffee and pay for my brother's medical bills. Croft listened to the entire story without interruption, his expression growing more and more grim. When she finished, he was silent for a long time, his fingers steepled before him. Alistair Finch, he said the name, tasting like poison. The man those boys were toasting. The man Viridian Ventures just gave millions of dollars to. The final horrifying piece of the puzzle clicked into place for Ilara. The quantum computing architecture they mentioned is almost certainly based on your theory Croft finished for her. He's not just building a reputation on your work, Miss Vance. He's building an empire. The injustice was so profound, so monstrous that Ilara could only stare into her tea, speechless. She had known he had stolen her academic future. She had never dreamed he was stealing a fortune from her, too. Croft leaned forward, his eyes burning with a cold fire. The world of academia and finance can be a cesspool of thieves and cowards, Miss Vance. They prey on brilliant people who lack the resources to defend themselves. But they have one fatal weakness: they are terrified of exposure. And they are even more terrified of being beaten at their own game. He paused, a calculated predatory gleam in his eye. I didn't come here tonight looking for you, but I believe I have found you nonetheless. I told you I was looking for a mind to solve a problem. That was true. Ethelred Capital is prepared to fund a new quantum research division, an entire institute if necessary. We have the resources, the labs, the engineers, everything we need. Except for a leader. Except for a mind with the vision to guide it. He slid a simple, elegant business card across the table. It contained only a name, Julian Croft, and a private phone number. I am not offering you a job, Miss Vance, he said, his voice low and resonant with purpose. Jobs are for people who follow orders. I am offering you a partnership. I will give you unlimited funding, your own lab, a hand-picked team of the best minds in the world. I am offering you the resources to not only finish your work, but to accelerate it past anything Finch could ever dream of. We will build your quantum computer based on your designs, and when we unveil it, you will be the one standing on the stage. You will reclaim your name, your work, and your future. He leaned back. We will not just expose Alistair Finch as a fraud. We will make his stolen work and Viridian Ventures' foolish investment completely and utterly obsolete. It was an offer of stunning, breathtaking scope. It was not just a life raft, it was a battleship, a chance not just for survival, but for victory, for justice. Tears welled in Ilara's eyes, not of sadness, but of a fierce, overwhelming hope that she had thought was long dead. She looked from the business card to the kind, powerful face of the man opposite her. Why, she whispered, why would you do all this for me? Julian Croft smiled, a hint of the philosopher he was, at heart showing through. Because, my dear Miss Vance, he said, I told you my principle. I look for value where no one else is looking. And tonight, in a greasy spoon diner, I have just found the most undervalued asset in the entire world. The dawn that followed the confrontation at the Starlight Diner broke differently for the two protagonists of the evening's drama. For Sterling Davenport, it arrived through the blinds of his penthouse apartment as a series of blinding, accusatory shards of light. He woke to the stale taste of expensive whiskey and the cold metallic tang of pure, unadulterated fear. The events replayed in his mind, not as a linear memory, but as a collage of horrifying snapshots, the waitress's sudden, terrifying transformation, the old man's piercing, disappointed eyes, the name Julian Croft echoing in the sudden silence of the diner. It was a name that could shatter careers with a whisper. His first instinct was damage control. By 8 a.m., he was on the phone with his father, a titan of old-world finance, who had always viewed his son's venture capital career with a mixture of pride and suspicion. The call was brutal. You did what his father's voice had boomed, a mixture of disbelief and fury. You insulted a woman in front of Julian Croft. Not just insulted you, belittled her, and she turned out to be a genius he was looking for. Sterling, have you lost your mind? This isn't just about bad manners. This is about judgment. It's about a fatal lack of perception. That's a death sentence in our world. Humiliated and terrified, Sterling then tried to call Croft's office directly. He spent 20 minutes navigating a labyrinth of automated systems before finally reaching a human being, a woman whose voice was unnervingly calm and polite. "Mr. Croft's office," she said. "This is Sterling Davenport of Viridian Ventures," he announced, trying to inject his voice with its usual breezy confidence, but it came out as a squeak. "I need to speak with Mr. Croft. There was a misunderstanding last night that I need to personally apologize for." "Of course, Mr. Davenport. Let me see," the secretary said. He heard the faint, crisp sound of typing. "I'm afraid Mr. Croft's schedule is fully committed for the foreseeable future. He did, however, leave a message for you, should you call." Hope, fragile and desperate, fluttered in Sterling's chest. Yes, the message is, actions have consequences, especially those taken when you believe no one of consequence is watching. "Goodbye, Mr. Davenport." The line went dead. The consequences began to cascade before lunch. An email arrived from their firm's largest limited partner, a major pension fund, announcing a re-evaluation of their commitment to Viridian's next fund. The subtext was clear. Chad and Bryce were in his office, their faces pale, their usual sycophantic praise replaced with panicked accusations. The Alistair Finch project, once the jewel in Sterling's crown, now felt like a ticking time bomb. What had Croft said? "If you don't understand the bedrock, how can you possibly hope to build a house upon it?" For the first time, Sterling felt the ground beneath his feet begin to crumble. For Elara Vance, the morning was the antithesis of Sterling's nightmare. She woke in her small, cramped apartment, not to the blare of her alarm clock, demanding she get to the diner, but to the gentle morning light. On her bedside table, Julian Croft's simple business card seemed to glow with impossible promise. For a few minutes, she wondered if she had dreamed it all, but the memory was too vivid, the equations she had spoken still echoing in her own ears. With a trembling hand, she dialed the number. She expected a secretary, an assistant, a gatekeeper. Instead, the voice that answered was his. "Croft." "Mr. Croft. This is Elara Vance. From the diner last night." "Miss Vance," he said, and his voice was warm, filled with genuine pleasure. "I was hoping you would call. I trust you slept well." "I didn't sleep at all," she confessed. "I was running calculations in my head." He chuckled a dry, appreciative sound. "Of course you were. That is precisely why I called on you. I have already set things in motion. My financial office will be in touch with you within the hour, regarding some logistical necessities. I want you to worry about physics, not finances. But first, there is a far more important matter. Tell me about your brother." And so, sitting on the edge of her worn-out mattress, Elara spoke about Leo. Not about the disease, but about the boy, his wit, his intelligence, his dreams of being an aerospace engineer. Croft listened patiently, asking gentle, insightful questions. By the end of the call, a plan was in place. A consultation was scheduled with the top specialist in the country. A medical transport was being arranged. It was all happening with a speed and efficiency that felt like magic. That day, Elara went to the Starlight Diner one last time. Not to work, but to quit. She found Sal by the grill flipping pancakes. She told him she was leaving, that she'd been offered a research position. She didn't offer details. She didn't need to. Sal grunted, wiped his greasy hands on his apron, and turned to face her. He looked her up and down, his gruff expression softening for a fraction of a second. "Knew it," he said. "Saw the way you looked at things. Like you were seeing through 'em. This place, it was just a bus stop for you, kid." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled envelope, pressing it into her hand. "This is from me and the rest of the crew. A bonus." Elara opened it later. It was filled with cash, hundreds of dollars. It was an astonishing sum for people who lived on tips and minimum wage. It was a gesture of solidarity, of respect. As she walked out the door, the bell chiming her departure, her eyes met Mrs. Gable's. The old woman simply smiled and raised her coffee cup in a silent, knowing toast. Elara felt a lump in her throat. She had been seen after all. The next 6 months were a blur of creation and rediscovery. The first victory was Leo. She watched as he was carefully transferred to a private medical institute that looked more like a university campus than a hospital. His new room was bright and airy, with a large window overlooking a garden. The first time she visited, he was propped up in bed, looking frail, but with the old spark back in his eyes. So he'd rasped a weak smile on his face. "You finally found someone who speaks your language." "I did," she said, her voice thick with emotion as she held his hand. "Good." He'd said, his grip surprisingly firm. "Now go get 'em, Elara. Go build the universe." That became her mantra. Julian Croft was not a man who did things by halves. He didn't just give her a lab, he gave her a kingdom. He personally walked her through a newly vacated floor of Ethelred Capital's sprawling R&D campus, a state-of-the-art facility filled with equipment so advanced it seemed like science fiction. "We'll call it the Vance Institute for Quantum Dynamics," Croft had declared, waving away her protests. "Ownership, Miss Vance. Legacy. These things matter." Then came the team. Croft flew her to conferences and universities, not to network, but to poach. He wanted her to find the other Elara Vances. Of the world, the brilliant misfits, the iconoclasts, the geniuses who had been stifled by academic bureaucracy or corporate short-sightedness. She found Dr. Kenji Tanaka, a hardware engineer from Caltech, who had been ostracized for his radical designs for cryogenic cooling systems. She hired Maria Flores, a chaotic but brilliant data scientist from CERN, who could coax patterns out of quantum noise like a snake charmer. They were a team of rebels united by a shared passion and a fierce loyalty to the woman who had given them a chance to build the impossible. The Vance Institute became a whirlwind of intellectual energy. Whiteboards were perpetually covered in a dense forest of equations. The air hummed with the quiet whir of supercomputers and smelled of burnt coffee and ozone from the prototypes. Elara was in her element, working 18-hour days, fueled by a passion she thought had been extinguished forever. The dynamic brain model, the ghosts in the manifold, evolved from a theoretical curiosity into a revolutionary blueprint for stable quantum computation. They were not just building a new type of computer. They were building a new key to unlock reality. Finally, the day of the Ethelred Innovation Summit arrived. It was the tech world's premier event, a place where fortunes were made and futures were unveiled. As Elara stood backstage, looking out at the vast auditorium filled with industry titans, investors, and the global press, a wave of stage fright washed over her. She was a physicist, not a performer. Croft appeared at her side, handing her a glass of water. "Remember the diner, Elara," he said quietly. "Remember those 3 arrogant boys. They represent everyone out there who judges the book by its cover. You are not speaking to them. You are speaking for everyone who has ever been underestimated. His words steadied her. When she walked onto the stage, it was not to the polite applause for an unknown academic, but to a thunderous ovation curated by Croft's own reputation. In the front row, she saw Leo. He was sitting in a state-of-the-art wheelchair, looking healthier and stronger than he had in years. He caught her eye and gave her a thumbs up. That was all she needed. Across the country, Dr. Alistair Finch watched the live stream from his university office, a smug smile on his face. He had heard rumors of Croft's new pet project, but he assumed it was years behind his own. He watched as Ilara, his former student, the girl whose career he had so casually destroyed, took the stage. His smile faltered. Ilara began to speak, her voice clear and confident. She didn't mention him. She didn't have to. She laid out the foundational principles of her theory with an elegance and depth that made Finch's published work seem like a child's crude copy. Then she unveiled the simulations, the hardware schematics, the results from their prototype. She announced that the Vance Institute had achieved a stable 100-qubit system, a feat the rest of the world thought was at least a decade away. In his office, Finch's blood ran cold. He wasn't just being surpassed, he was being rendered irrelevant. His phone began to ring, the caller ID flashing a name from Viridian Ventures. He ignored it. He watched, mesmerized by his own destruction, as Ilara concluded. The universe, she said, her eyes sweeping across the audience, is not a silent, empty place. It is a symphony of information, playing out on a stage of dimensions we are only just beginning to perceive. And we have finally learned how to listen. In a small, drab office in a different part of the city, Sterling Davenport watched the same live stream on his laptop. He had been demoted, sidelined, his future at Viridian hanging by a thread. He watched the woman he had called Sweetheart receive a standing ovation that seemed to shake the foundations of the building. He saw the respect in the eyes of the people he had spent his entire life trying to impress. The shame was a physical ache, a permanent hollowness in his chest. As the applause washed over her, Ilara's gaze found Leo's again. This was for him. This was for every long night at the diner, for every casual insult she had swallowed, for every dream she had been forced to defer. Julian Croft joined her on stage, raising her hand in a gesture of shared triumph. She looked out at the sea of faces, and she no longer saw a terrifying crowd. She saw a world of possibilities. They had mocked the waitress, blind to the universe she held within her. Now she was going to show it to them. Her work was not just an answer to a question posed in a diner. It was the beginning of a new chapter in human history, written by a woman they had tried to erase. Thank you for joining us on Ilara's incredible journey. Her story is a powerful reminder that brilliance, courage, and potential can be found in the most unexpected places. It's a testament to the fact that you should never judge someone by their job, their uniform, or their current situation. The quietest person in the room might just have the loudest, most revolutionary ideas. Every single person has a story, a hidden depth of knowledge and experience that we can't see on the surface. We hope this story inspires you to look past appearances, to value the unseen potential in others, and to never ever let anyone make you feel small. If Ilara's story of resilience and ultimate triumph resonated with you, please help us share it with the world. Hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message, and be sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. We have so many more powerful real-life stories like this one coming your way. Thank you for watching.